So let's say you're living in medieval Europe and you wake up one morning feeling a bit under the weather. You figure it's probably just a cold, maybe something you ate at the tavern last night. But then you notice something weird happening to your body. Your skin starts changing color, maybe you're bleeding from places you shouldn't be bleeding from, or perhaps you're developing growths that look like something out of a nightmare. Well, congratulations, because you've just contracted one of the most horrifying diseases that medieval people had to deal with on a daily basis. Now, I know what you're thinking. You've heard of the Black Death, you know about leprosy, maybe you've even read about scurvy. But trust me when I tell you that those are just the tip of the iceberg. The medieval world was absolutely crawling with diseases so bizarre, so disturbing, and so downright terrifying that modern medicine textbooks barely mention them. Why? Because most of these conditions were so rare or so poorly understood that they've been forgotten by history until now. What I'm about to show you are 5 medieval diseases that will make you appreciate every single advancement in modern medicine. These aren't your typical plague stories. No, these are the conditions that made medieval doctors throw up their hands and start praying because they had absolutely no idea what they were dealing with. And honestly, after researching these for weeks, I can't blame them. But before we dive into this medical nightmare, let me just say that if you're eating while watching this video, you might want to put that sandwich down. Trust me on this one, because what you're about to hear will make you realize that living in the 21st century isn't so bad after all. Let's start with something that sounds innocent enough, but is actually one of the most disturbing conditions I've ever researched. It's called St. Anthony's Fire. And no, it's not some kind of religious experience. This disease would literally make people feel like they were burning alive from the inside out. Victims would experience excruciating pain as their limbs turned black and eventually just fell off their bodies. Yeah, you heard that right. Their arms and legs would literally detach and drop to the ground. The cause of this nightmare was something that medieval people encountered every single day without even knowing it: contaminated rye grain that had been infected with a fungus called ergot. When people ate bread made from this infected grain, they were essentially poisoning themselves with one of the most powerful hallucinogens known to man. But the hallucinations were just the beginning of their problems. The ergot would cause their blood vessels to constrict so severely that entire limbs would lose circulation and die. Imagine watching your own hand turn black over the course of several days, knowing that it's going to fall off and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. Medieval physicians had no idea what was causing this condition, so they attributed it to divine punishment or demonic possession. The lucky victims died quickly. The unlucky ones lived long enough to watch their bodies literally fall apart piece by piece. But St. Anthony's Fire was just getting warmed up because the ergot poisoning also caused intense hallucinations that would last for days. People would see demons, angels, talking animals, or burning cities that weren't actually there. Some victims became convinced that they could fly and would throw themselves off buildings. Others would strip naked and run through the streets screaming about visions of hell. And all of this was happening while their limbs were rotting away. The really messed up part is that entire communities would sometimes be affected at once when a bad batch of rye made it into the local bread supply. Imagine an entire village going insane and losing their limbs simultaneously. It was like something out of a horror movie, except it was completely real and happening to real people who had no idea why their world was suddenly falling apart. Now, if you think St. Anthony's Fire sounds bad, wait until you hear about the next disease on our list. This one is called the Dancing Plague, and it's exactly what it sounds like, except way more disturbing than you're probably imagining right now. Picture this: you're walking through the streets of a medieval town when you suddenly see a woman dancing. Nothing weird about that, right? Except she's been dancing for 3 straight days without stopping. Her feet are bleeding, she's foaming at the mouth, and she looks absolutely terrified. But she can't stop dancing. Every time she tries to stop, her body just starts moving again against her will. Then you notice that there are other people dancing too. Dozens of them, all with the same horrified expression, all unable to stop their bodies from moving in this frantic, desperate dance. Some of them are crying while they dance, others are screaming. A few have already collapsed from exhaustion, but their bodies keep twitching and jerking even as they lie on the ground. This actually happened, by the way, not once, but multiple times throughout medieval Europe. The most famous outbreak occurred in Strasbourg in 1518, when a woman named Frau Trophea started dancing in the street and couldn't stop. Within a week, dozens of other people had joined her in this involuntary dance marathon. Within a month, there were over 400 people dancing themselves to death in the streets. And yes, I said dancing themselves to death because that's exactly what happened. People would dance for days or even weeks without rest until their hearts gave out, they collapsed from dehydration, or they literally danced themselves to death. The local authorities tried everything they could think of to stop it. They brought in musicians, thinking that maybe organized music would help. That just made it worse. They tried exorcisms, thinking it was demonic possession. No luck there either. Some historians think it was mass hysteria brought on by extreme stress and poverty. Others believe it might have been caused by the same ergot poisoning that caused St. Anthony's fire. But honestly, nobody really knows for sure what caused entire communities to suddenly start dancing until they died. What we do know is that it was absolutely terrifying to witness, and it left medieval people completely baffled about what was happening to their neighbors, their friends, and sometimes even their own family members. The really disturbing part is that the dancers were completely aware of what was happening to them. They knew they were going to die if they couldn't stop, but their bodies just wouldn't listen to their minds. But that's not even the strangest part about the dancing plague. See, medieval doctors actually thought they had a cure for it. They believed that the only way to stop someone from dancing was to make them dance even more until they got it out of their system. So they would hire professional musicians and dancers to encourage the victims to keep going, thinking this would somehow exhaust whatever was causing the compulsive movement. Obviously, this just made everything worse and probably killed people faster than if they had just left them alone. What makes this whole situation even more bizarre is that it wasn't random. The dancing plague seemed to follow very specific patterns. It would usually start with one person, almost always a woman, and then spread to others who witnessed it. But it didn't spread like a normal disease. It spread like an idea, jumping from person to person through observation rather than physical contact. Medieval people had no framework for understanding psychological contagion, so they assumed it had to be supernatural. Now let's move on to something that sounds like it came straight out of a fairy tale, except way more horrifying. This condition was called the sweating sickness, and it was basically like someone took the flu and turned it into a medieval death sentence that could kill you in less than 24 hours. The sweating sickness would hit without warning. One moment you'd be perfectly fine, going about your daily business, and the next moment you'd be drenched in sweat and feeling like you were about to die. And here's the really terrifying part. You probably were about to die because this disease had a mortality rate that made the Black Death look like a minor inconvenience. Victims would start sweating profusely, but not normal sweat. This was a thick, oily sweat that had a distinctive smell that people described as absolutely revolting. The sweating would be accompanied by violent shaking, severe headaches, and a feeling of impending doom that was so intense that many people became convinced they were about to meet their maker, and they were often right. What made the sweating sickness particularly cruel is that it seemed to specifically target healthy, wealthy people in their prime. While other diseases would typically kill the young, the old, and the weak, this one had a strange preference for robust adults who should have been able to fight off illness. Entire royal courts would be decimated in a matter of days. Henry VIII's court was hit so hard by one outbreak that he fled London and spent months moving from castle to castle, trying to outrun the disease. The really messed up part is that there was no treatment for it whatsoever. Medieval physicians tried everything they could think of. They bled patients, they gave them herbal remedies, they prayed over them. They even tried covering them in blankets to make them sweat more, thinking that might help get whatever was causing it out of their system. Nothing worked. People would either survive the first 24 hours or they wouldn't, and there was absolutely no way to predict which group you'd end up in. But here's where it gets even weirder. The sweating sickness would appear suddenly, kill hundreds or thousands of people, and then just disappear completely for years at a time. It would show up in England, terrorize the population for a few months, and then vanish without a trace. Then, maybe 5 or 10 years later, it would come back just as suddenly as it had left. This pattern continued for over a century, and then, around 1551, it just stopped appearing altogether. Nobody knows why it stopped, just like nobody really knows what caused it in the first place. Modern medical historians have theories, of course. Some think it might have been a type of hantavirus spread by rodents. Others believe it could have been an early form of influenza that mutated itself out of existence. But the truth is, we'll probably never know for sure what the sweating sickness actually was, because it killed its victims so quickly that medieval doctors never had time to study it properly. Speaking of diseases that medieval doctors couldn't understand, let's talk about something called the King's Evil. Now, this one had a really interesting twist because people actually believed that it could be cured by the touch of a king. Yeah, you heard that right. They thought royal blood had magical healing properties. The King's Evil was actually what we now know as scrofula, a form of tuberculosis that affects the lymph nodes in the neck. But medieval people had no idea what lymph nodes were, so when they saw these massive, grotesque swellings appearing on people's necks, they assumed it had to be some kind of supernatural affliction. So there you have it, 5 medieval diseases that make our worst nightmares look like pleasant dreams. From limbs falling off due to contaminated bread to people dancing themselves to death in the streets, medieval Europe was a horror movie that nobody could turn off. The next time you're complaining about waiting in line at the doctor's office or dealing with a minor cold, just remember that you're living in an era where we actually understand what's happening to our bodies and have ways to fix it. Medieval people didn't have that luxury. They lived in a world where your morning bread could make your arms fall off, where dancing could literally kill you, and where sweating too much meant you'd probably be dead by sunset. Makes you appreciate modern medicine just a little bit more.